Hello, everybody. I'm Pasha Marlowe. Welcome back to Let Pleasure Be the Measure podcast. And I want to tell you that today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, ADHD and relationships, and specifically divorce, but I think a little bit of sex too. And the reason why I bring that up is because I just started, like today, a new free Facebook group called Getting Intimate with ADHD. And it's for women only who want to be in community with other women with ADHD who want a safe and empathetic space to talk about their relationship to themselves, their partners, sex, sexuality, uh, you know, conversation, communication, all the things. So I just wanted to let you all know about that so I don't forget. And I want to welcome today's guest, Natalie Nolan from Ontario, Canada, who is a life coach specializing in ADHD and divorce. So I'm very excited to have you today. Welcome, Natalie.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Pasha. It's my
Absolutely.
pleasure to be here.
Thank you. I've been following you on Instagram um, for a lot of different reasons. One is because my marriage is rocky and I have a marriage with a person with ADHD and I have ADHD. So there's a lot of relational issues that come up in my world that you bring up in your posts. But then also it feels like, correct me if I'm wrong, there's also been kind of this resurgence of like a kind of a sexual revolution and talking about sex and sexuality and just how women can explore and expand in that area. And that lights me up, not only because I have a pleasure podcast, but because I think we need more spaces for women to safely talk about sex and intimacy. Excuse me. So tell us how you came to working with people with ADHD.
Well, my ADHD journey, I guess you could say, started when my older daughter started to have struggles in school in grade 7. And it actually wasn't even ADHD that we figured out first. It was, she was being bullied. And then she got really, really depressed and she wanted to switch schools. We switched her schools, and then it just wasn't as easy as what she thought it would be. And she got more depressed and suicidal. And, it wasn't good. It wasn't good. So she ended up having a hospital visit and she was put on medication, on antidepressants. And the antidepressants actually made her sort of go into like a hypomania.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened was it was actually the special education and resource teacher at the school that asked if she had ADHD, because apparently it's something that's very common with those that have ADHD. If you go on what are they called? Antidepressants. Thank you. Spaced out there. Antidepressants, then it can amplify your ADHD
Yes.
and put you into this mania type thing. So we decided to take her off the medication because she was doing some crazy stuff. And so we decided to privately get her a psychoeducational assessment. And that was when absolutely they found out that she had ADHD. And so, I mean, since then, she has a plethora of other diagnoses
Yeah.
since then, now that she's 19. But back then it was the ADHD and of course ODD. And then she also had some depressive disorder, some kind of depressive disorder or something like that. So general anxiety disorder. I
Yeah.
can't remember. Anyways, it was ages ago. But so that led me to deciding, hey, I'm going to look more into this and see what it's all about. I started reading up on it. And then a girlfriend of mine told me about a support group. So I joined the support group it was a parent support group.
Nice.
So I joined that, and the coach, I started using her for my daughter and for myself. And I started to kind of question, wait a second here. I don't know. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So
Some common
I
patterns.
very, I have never been formally diagnosed. Just from everything that I've learned about it, I just kind of assume I have it. essentially, and live accordingly, and strategies, tools, all that stuff, right? It's a struggle. It can be a struggle in different areas. Life balance can be fun too, right?
Yes.
So long story short, I went to the Atlanta convention.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went there, it was like, oh my gosh, I've found my people.
And these are
Like
my people.
they're my people. And
Everyone's looking for their keys and their wallet and their glasses.
oh my God, that was when I first discovered the tile, a
The
tile.
tiles. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was a life changer. But
Mm.
anyway, I came back from that and I'm like, you know what? That's it. I'm going to become a life coach, especially in ADHD. So I joined ADCA
Mm-hmm.
back.
Good.
I can't even remember what year that was, to be honest. I want to say 2017 or 2018. And I did my coaching through ADCA. And I
Great.
came out initially being a coach for moms or women with
Mm-hmm.
ADHD. And since going to ADCA and going through the personal transformation course they had, I learned so much about myself and
Yes.
about needs and about boundaries and all these things. And it really changed my life drastically, and which ultimately led to the ending of my marriage. And
Mm-hmm.
so, through the ending of my marriage and my own journey and joining another support group for separation and everything, I have come out of it on the other side. And now I want to do that for
Mm-hmm.
women. I want to
Yes.
be that space for women to come to, women, especially women with ADHD. So
Yes.
hence my Instagram handle of ADHD divorce,
Yes.
ADHD IVORCE. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. I love it when we could take our heartache and turn it into, service to others and reframe it
Yeah.
that way. But you bring up a lot of really good points. Before I forget, I want to tell listeners who are not aware that ADHD is hereditary as height. And so if your child has ADHD, it is highly likely that you or your partner or their other parent do. And that it's often just in families generations passed down, but we are just now starting to diagnose more women, especially late in life, and girls, because
Mm-hmm.
our hyperactivity doesn't always show up in the body. A lot of times for women and girls, it shows up in the mind, so ruminating
Mm-hmm.
thoughts and a very active mind, even though we don't physically take on the attributes of what we would see as hyperactive in our, back in the day when we learned about ADHD. So I just want to put that out there. But the thing that you brought up that I'm really excited about actually is that when you make these transformations, when you go to retreats or coaching programs, or when you feel like you're, finally in your own power and in your own body, that we often outgrow our relationships that we're in,
Mm-hmm.
and that often leads to the divorce or separation or just the completeness of that
Mm-hmm.
relationship. And so were you you assume you have ADHD. Did your partner at the time, do you think, have ADHD as well?
I suspected sometimes, but I mean,
Mm.
if I had when I mentioned that to him, he wasn't too game on exploring that. But
Okay.
I wondered maybe if that was a possibility.
Yeah.
I also think that a couple of my other kids could have it. I'm looking
Sure.
into getting an assessment done for my younger son, and then at some point, maybe even my younger daughter. Baby
Yes.
steps.
Yeah, yeah, right. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's just all, any information is good information. I know for me, the ADHD definitely affects my relationship, and how we work together. And the parent-child dynamic, that is
Mm-hmm.
often the case in ADHD marriages, where the lower functioning, let's say both of you might have ADHD, or one of you might and the other one doesn't, but the one who's the not as highly functioning often takes on the child role, and then the partner who's higher functioning often takes on a parental role. And this destroys relationships, because this
Mm-hmm.
power hierarchy dynamic comes into play throughout all parts of the day, including with intimacy and sex, and it just becomes really messy. And I'm just wondering if you've experienced that kind of parent-child dynamic in your past relationships or in your current relationships, given your ADHD.
You know what? I think that when I look back on my marriage, I think that we both sort of had a turn at that in a way, in
Mm-hmm.
different ways, in very different ways. There was times where I felt like I was kind of his executive functions when it came to appointments and the calendar and all that stuff, right? And then he felt that way when it came to finances, because
Yeah.
I'm a very much in the moment kind of person. I don't look ahead. And so for him, he was almost always looking ahead, right? Always thinking about retirement, planning for retirement, and working toward that. Whereas for me, it's like, okay, in some ways I was probably good for him in that way, because
Yeah.
I was always trying to bring him back and say, wait a second, we're here now.
Mm-hmm.
Let's try to live here now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And let's try to enjoy life, and let's try to smell the flowers and all that type of stuff. Right. Whereas
Yeah.
for him, I think he could get really caught up in his work mode.
Yes.
And right. And so it was hard for him to transition out of that work mode. So,
Yes.
so
And
it
yet
was, yeah.
what you're describing is actually also a really healthy aspect of a relationship, where you find your own lane or your own silos or whatever you want to refer to it as, and if one partner takes finances and the other partner takes scheduling or whatever, that actually can work really, really well. For So if this, for me too, my math and numbers not my thing. My husband teaches math. You should do the bills, right? For sure.
Yeah.
But I'm a planner. And so I should plan, vacations and doctor's appointments and things. So there is some beauty in that
Mhm.
delegation. And so it's interesting to see how each relationship works, and what really becomes potentially unhealthy in a relationship. And it sounds like for you, you went through a kind of evolution and transformation that made it so that particular relationship no longer served you well.
Yes, I think what happened was that through the years, be it because of the ADHD and I was always so chatty and lively and energetic, and people were always kind of trying to shut me up, essentially,
Mm,
right? I
too
was I
much,
was
too much,
too much. I was
too
too
much.
much. And so,
Hmm.
you start to stifle your voice through the years.
Yeah.
And then, in order to um avoid rejection and conflict, you overplease and you overgive,
Right.
and then you just lose yourself. And I felt so lost at one point, and it just made me, all I could focus on was all stuff about him and how
Mm-hmm.
he needed to change and how I wanted to fix him, right?
Mm.
And then all of a sudden one day it was kind of like, wait a second here, um what about you? Maybe it's time to take a look at yourself. And I
Mm.
think that my daughter's journey was really the catalyst for that, because it kind of really made me have to take a big, long, hard look at myself,
Yeah.
because she was trying to have a voice so hard. and
Mm.
and me being a parent, actually probably both of us, but being the parents that couldn't have voices for different reasons, it was really hard to have this child that had such a strong voice.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, I think we worked way too hard trying to quiet her voice,
Mm.
and how much she suffered because of that.
Mm.
And so I say to her now, I'm like, yeah, I realized back then that I was totally trying to stifle your voice, but it was because I didn't even have one.
Right.
And
Right.
so there was this part of me that was ticked off that here's my child getting to have a voice, and I don't even have a voice.
Mm-hmm.
And, can't you just conform, and can't you just behave, especially
Mm.
with her dad, because they would fight all the time and I was put in the
Mm.
middle. And
Mm.
so it it was a real sort of awakening for me, for
Yeah.
my own journey to my back to myself, essentially. And I mean, it took a while. It's taken a while. It's been a long process because you're just relearning everything and just completely deconstructing yourself and then rebuilding, right?
Mhm.
And
And when
so that's sort of what I've done for myself and obviously what I want to do for my clients as well.
Yes. And often when we deconstruct and rebuild, we rebuild differently, and we rebuild stronger, and we rebuild with the knowledge and perspective of our lessons, hard
Yeah.
as they are. And
Yeah.
it's very interesting that your catalyst moment was your daughter finding her voice, and you're like, I want a voice too. And how many times we play small and people please, uh, so as to not whatever cause trouble or conflict, or um, you know, be too seen, or seen as too much. So yeah, that's a very common phenomenon and experience for people with ADHD, that they either feel like they're not enough or too much, and that, you know, this sense of like the world is not made for me, and relationships aren't in the cards for me. You know,
Mm-hmm.
how will I ever find a person? So I imagine it must have been an interesting journey for you post divorce to begin dating, and how to reconcile your ADHD, or how to introduce yourself to somebody with your new voice. How was that transition?
Uh, you know what? I mean, initially I wasn't even really wanting to date. I mean, I tried to get out there a little bit and it's like the universe had other ideas for me. So I just kind of went, whatever, I'm just going to do my own thing, work on me. And then along came, my current boyfriend, and it's been fun. It's been a real learning curve for the both of us. I've always been very open and honest with him about how my brain works, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
and what comes along with that, and just and then learning the whole communication thing, like before, like in my marriage and other relationships, I definitely was not great at communicating. I could be very reactive and take things
Mhm.
very personally, or I
Mhm.
would just sit quiet and I wouldn't speak up and I wouldn't say anything, and it would fester and fester and
Yes.
fester inside, and then you're just like losing it on them, right? And
Boil
it's
over.
like, what the hell is wrong with her? And so, I learned that I started to even say to him one time, he said something like, are we still talking about this? And,
Yeah,
and I
yes,
was
we are.
like, oh, no, you didn't just say that. And so after we calm down and we
Mm.
come back to it, because there has been times where we both get kind of triggered, right?
Yes.
And that's the younger parts of ourselves that are and old wounds. And so we step back and we come back and talk about it again later. And at one point I said to him, I go, just so we're clear, I'm never going to just drop it.
It's never
I
just going to be a dropped
no,
topic. Yes. We're going to
no,
finish
I
this. Yeah.
yeah, like we need to talk about it.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing because we're going to learn more about each other and we're going to learn more about ourselves,
Yes.
right? So that with the next time, maybe that won't even turn into a conflict because
Yeah.
we already know about that particular situation, topic, whatever, right?
Yes. I often tell my husband, I said, I'm in conversation with you all day long, even though we're not talking. Like I'm preparing for the conversation. I'm reviewing the conversation. I'm thinking about it. And so when I come back to him with like, here's what I figured out, or here's what I have on, he's like, what are we talking about? Are we talking about that thing we talked about yesterday? Like, what was that even? I'm like, I've been processing this for like
Yes.
24 hours and it's been stuck in my throat. Now I could finally say it and you don't even
Yeah.
remember what we're talking about. Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating how some people can compartmentalize. And sometimes I'm jealous
Mm,
of that, but that is not my brain. And so, yeah, we have to work with each other in partnership to figure out, you know, how we communicate, how we process, how we
mhm,
how our which love languages we have, and how to respond without reacting. So yeah, all of that boundary
mhm.
setting in
Oh,
relationships is
for
like
sure.
it's a lot, and anyone we enter partnership with or date, we're going to have to do that with.
Oh, for sure.
Mhm.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree.
And so that leads us into something I haven't experienced in decades, which would be um, sex during dating. And so, and not necessarily yours, but like in the general sense. And we both watched Goop.
Oh,
I saw the first season.
fabulous. Oh,
Is that
I
all there
loved it.
is right now?
Yeah.
Now the first season.
Yeah. I blasted through it. I'm so upset. The first season's over already.
Yeah, well, you could rewatch it.
Oh,
Well, what I
no,
thought was really impactful, and I think this is what you mentioned in one of your posts that was impactful to you, is the amount of body shaming that we
mm,
do as women, and that we can look at another woman in all of their, whether it's curviness or what they would consider flaws, and we could see the divine perfection in them or the uniqueness in them and the beauty, but we can't do that for ourselves.
so
And
true.
yeah, and it was fascinating watching these women looking at themselves in the mirror,
Mhm.
very honestly and vulnerably. And so I imagine if I were ever to date again, that I would go through an enormous amount of questioning as to, like, do these parts still work? Am I worthy? Am I still desirable? Like, all my body issues would come back upon dating. Do you find that to be true?
Oh, yeah, for sure. That was totally something that I was working through with my therapist. Because, and I mean, I follow a bunch of amazing accounts on Instagram that have really, really helped me with that, which, like the Birds Papaya and Stephanie Chin Art. She does amazing. I love her art. Actually, I just got her book and some of her art today in the mail.
Nice.
But yeah, it was a huge thing for me. And I know a bunch of other women that, I'd been in support group with and everything. Like, I mean, eh, we all went through that. I think it's totally normal for women to go through that. That's why I thought that episode of Goop, the Goop Lab, where they're like looking at their private parts and understanding, actually, I think they were even looking at each other's, to be honest, weren't they?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there were some
And
mirrors and there was some, yeah, a lot of just observing.
well, and so they could understand, like, they weren't just seeing theirs, they were seeing other people's and understanding that they're all unique and
Yes.
different and all normal or whatever, right? And so,
Yes.
because I think that a lot of women can, come out of especially a long marriage, right, and feel like that, especially if they've had kids and everything, right? It's just their whole body, everything. It's definitely something that you have to work through
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
accept.
Important work. And whether you're in partnership or not, or whether you're divorced or not, it's always such important and worthy work to come to a place of self love and acceptance and knowledge. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, maybe to some out there, like get in the mirror and checking it out and see what's down there, right? And it's like one of the things I love the most is this. I don't know if they call it. It might even be called vulva art. It's either vulva art or labia art, but it's like
Mm-hmm.
mosaics of all
Mm-hmm.
the many shapes and colors and sizes and forms that the vulva takes on, and that they're all completely unique, like snowflakes, and each one beautiful. And that it's really fascinating to be able to take the perspective of wonder, for our own
Mm-hmm.
bodies and everybody else's, and that if we can reclaim that for ourselves, potentially even before we enter into a sexual relationship with somebody, that's wonderful, because then you come in empowered and not needing to please, like, well, how do you like it, and what should I do with this, how should I groom, what's
I
all the
I
questions.
think that is the mistake that we can make, is that
Mhm.
we leave the power up to the
Right.
partner, and
Yes.
rather than going in armed with, okay, I know my body best,
Yes.
I have discovered it, I know it, and I don't have to rely on this person entirely to pleasure
No.
me, right?
No.
And it doesn't have to all fall on them. Or even understand, I'm reading a book right now. It's called Come As You Are. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Dr. Emily Nagoski, I believe.
Yes, you're right. Very good. And it's,
Fantastic book.
yeah, I'm not through it yet, but I love the whole idea of it where, you know what, like come out of your marriage, arm yourself with all this knowledge about how your body operates and, you know, what gets in your way of pleasure, right? Like
Yes.
what gets in your way, because that book's so fantastic. It talks about all the different reasons that
Yes.
things can get in your way of experiencing full pleasure during your intimacy.
Absolutely. I believe she talks about it in the sense of like accelerators and brakes, like noticing
Mhm.
for yourself and talking to yourself and maybe potentially your partner. Like these are the things that turn me on. These are the things that accelerate my desire.
Mhm.
And then these
Mhm.
are the things where I put on the brakes, and maybe it's hearing the kids next door or dirty dishes or, you know, having a hard day at work. So that, you know, oh, okay, well, so desire, she says, is arousal and context. Like you can't just have desire if you've had a shitty day or people have been dumping on you. So there has to be the context of arousal to feel the desire. So yeah, it's a fascinating book, and it's so um, it's simple. It's simple
Mhm.
and really in depth as well, in the sense of how much work you can do. But she presents it in a way that really makes sense.
Oh yeah, I mean it's fantastic, right? And especially for women because um I think that generally speaking there can be a lot more brakes for us than accelerators. A lot
Yes,
more
a lot more.
can get in the way, especially after you have kids,
Yes.
or
Mhm.
or not necessarily have kids, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
And so, whether they're adopted, biological, whatever,
Yeah.
is once they're in your life, how that can impact your life,
Absolutely.
and how it can get in your way of, you know, getting your mojo going, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And or just the environment or just that emotional connection, whereas a lot of, you know, men can really sort of, it can be relatively effortless because just they just need a little bit of visual
Sometimes, right.
stimulation, right? Not always, not
Mhm.
always, right? But generally speaking. And so it can take a lot more effort for women to sort of get in the mood or stay in the mood.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times for women, we need the kind of foreplay to start first thing in the morning. Like from the time you wake up to the time you get naked, you know, is this other person that we're considering having sex with, you know, being kind or compassionate or helpful today? That really matters.
Mhm.
I did a podcast with Ari Tuckman, who writes about ADHD and sex. It's called ADHD After Dark. And
Hmm.
I ended up calling it ADHD plus dishes equals sex. But because we talked about how foreplay might look like chores, you know, and
Mhm.
that's potentially a turn on to one partner. But if it's not a turn on, at least it's taking some of the breaks away, some of the distractions away, the other things that like run through our minds in the middle of sex, even that just distract us. And so having an awareness of what our partners need to set the scene,
Mhm.
and then what we need for ourselves to, you know, even with self pleasure, you know, what needs to happen. It's not like it's just gonna like come to us and we're gonna all of a sudden feel desire, right?
There it is.
Yeah.
Sorry, I
So,
couldn't hear you for a minute.
oh, okay, I was talking about self, I
I'm
was just talking about masturbation. You're good.
Oh my god, I should have put had my fan on. This conversation's making me all hot. Woo.
Sorry, I'm used to it, and so I don't often remember that it's like awkward for some people. So we can lighten it up. Let's talk about dopamine for a second, because I can't hear you now, so I think you're muted. Um, I'll chit chat while she's getting her mic back. But often with ADHD, we require dopamine hits to keep ourselves alert and alive and engaged. And so we find that you know, the newness of a new relationship is obviously a hit of dopamine. But then when you're in a long-term relationship or a marriage, all of a sudden, like, we don't have the novelty, we don't have the diversity or the variety. And so we actually have to like create that for ourselves in our marriage, right? And so this could,
Absolutely.
oh, good, you're back. This could take on like toys, pornography, sometimes even other partners, or talking about fantasy, and like not always doing it in bed, on a holiday, on somebody's birthday, in a hotel. Like, it doesn't have to be the same all the time. That really, really
Hmm.
helps. So
Hmm.
honoring the fact that the ADHD brain needs novelty and can be very loyal and monogamous as well. I'm not saying that people with ADHD cannot be monogamous, but there is a high rate of divorce from infidelity
Hmm.
in the ADHD world because of that craving for newness. And so, do you find
Hmm.
that a lot with your clients, that often what is the demise of the marriage is the desire discrepancy or the lack of novelty?
I think so far, what I've found is actually it's more of a there's been a lot of problems with the the ADHD and the reactivity
Mm-hmm.
sort of being kind of used against them.
Okay.
And so, like where their reactions sort of they're purposely triggered or
Mm-hmm.
gaslit, and then they react, and then it becomes about their reaction, so then everything's always their fault. And
Spiral.
there's been a lot, yeah, there's been a lot of sort of unhealthy toxic dynamics
Yeah.
within the relationships as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of been an element as well that can happen where it can get sort of turned back at them about their ADHD. I think that's why sometimes people with ADHD are really fearful of being
Mm.
honest up front, right up front about having it with their partner, because they are afraid that at some point they're going to throw it back in their face.
Right. Yeah. Emotional just deregulation is a challenge with ADHD. And so it might be something that one would be nervous about sharing. But if it's true that we become reactive or highly emotional to certain situations, or triggered, then ultimately we will end up sharing it either through experience or our words and sharing. And so, yeah, and what's exhausting is armoring up and
Mm-hmm.
hiding all of that. And then we don't feel, if we do armor up, seen or understood or fully known. And then that's that empty feeling of, I think, loneliness, where if you're not fully known, then you're actually feeling alone, even in relationship, if you're hiding
Oh
all.
yeah, for sure. Oops.
Mhm, mhm.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's a really good point. But it goes both ways too. I mean, as much as you can say that the person might be using that against the person with ADHD, let's say, then it's also, it is a person with ADHD's responsibility to understand if they are reactive,
Absolutely.
let's get curious with that. Where is it coming from, right? How, you know, what is causing this, and
Yes.
let's figure that out so that we can start to understand our triggers, and sooner or later over time decrease them, right?
Mhm.
And just getting curious and working on that part, right? Whereas the
Yes.
other person, maybe the person that's sort of picking at them about their stuff, obviously they need to work on some stuff too. It goes both ways, right? It goes both ways.
Definitely, it's an
And
interaction, right? And the
yeah.
person without ADHD potentially needs to become more aware of how the ADHD brain works and become more um, compassionate. And then the person with ADHD, rather than making it an excuse, needs to work on managing it in different ways so that the relationship can still function. So yeah, I think that's a great point, that it goes both ways, and that it's not always the person with ADHD's fault that
Hmm.
communication doesn't work, or sex doesn't work, or partnership in general. Definitely not. Definitely not. In my work as a marriage and family therapist, I see things in an interaction, like a pattern of interaction, and it takes two at least to create that pattern that we're working
Mm.
with each other and against each other, and off of each other. And so, yeah, it's really important to recognize, the patterns that we fall into that continue. Like we repeat our patterns, right? We're like, oh, here we are, and this is that argument again. We're gonna have that argument. Before that argument was about laundry, and now it's about dishes, and now it's about doctor's appointments, but it's the same argument, the same pattern of conversation that we're having.
And ultimately we're all just kind of projecting at each other, right? So it's like, okay, let me own up to my shit, you own up to your shit, I'll work on my shit, you work on your shit, and let's see what we can do together, right?
Bring our shit together.
If yeah, let's bring our shit together and let's see if it's going to work, right?
Yeah.
And I mean that can be said about anything in the relationship, like you were even saying before about the intimacy and about keeping that spark going, right?
Yeah.
So there's like two extremes to it. It's like, okay, you don't want to get addicted to that whole dopamine rush with the intimacy, but at the same time you recognize that you need that little spark. So how can you keep that going? And as a couple, you need to keep it going together. It's not up to just one person. I think the ADHDer, knowing that they need that spark, it can end up being sort of them doing all the work that way, where they're the one trying to always find new and interesting things to do or whatever, and initiate. And then, but it needs to sort of go both ways. They both need to kind of do it and figure it out together and communicate what their needs are and what they like and dislike. And it can be that way with the entire relationship, right? With even the communication, just about talking about, like, opening the communication and being open-minded and taking in what each other needs, and knowing that each partner, like neither partner is the sole cup filler for the other partner. Right. We are our own cups. We have to know how to fill our own cups first.
Yes.
And then, yeah, it's gravy if we're getting our cups filled in other areas and other ways, but we can't rely on our partner. And I remember I was there definitely for sure at one point thinking, okay, like I felt like I wasn't getting my needs met or whatever. Mind you, I wasn't exactly speaking up about them either. Right. So it's, but I was pouring into everybody else's cup in the family, right? And not filling my own cup enough. So I was getting burnout often and pissed off often. And then and then you project it onto everybody else and you're pissed off at everybody else, but it's you're stifling your own needs and not speaking up for them.
Yeah. You bring up two really good points. One is that we have to be able to meet our own needs, and one person can't provide all the things we need: the friendship, the camaraderie, the sex, the organization, the executive functioning. Like that's a magical person that probably won't exist, but we could rely on
Exactly.
ourselves.
Unicorn.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
But then also when you said you were filling everybody else's cup, nobody was filling yours. The big component to that is, like, we have to be really specific about what we need in asking for help, and then receive it, and be, set those boundaries so that we can say, I can't do this, I can do this, I need help with this, so that we don't find ourselves in as many times overwhelm and feeling depleted, which is just so common for women to have that emotional toll, really.
Well, boundaries is huge. I mean, I think that I remember when I was going through the academy, and I felt like almost nobody in my class knew what the heck boundaries were. We were all dying to get to the boundaries unit because we're like, what are boundaries? What do you mean? And it took me a while even to fully comprehend what they were and how to initiate them, how to set them, how to stand strong to them, how to be consistent with them. I'm still not consistent with them all the time with my kids. For sure. That's been a big learning curve. Actually, probably one of my hardest learning curves with my divorce has been that, there was lessons that I was never, ever going to be able to learn while I was with my partner. Just like there's lessons he never would have learned while he was with me. And
Yes.
you get out there on your own and you're thrown to the wolves and you have to figure it out. And it would just keep staring you in the face over and over and over again until you finally learn the lesson. And so the boundaries with my kids, especially my older daughter, has it took a long time. And you know what she said to me after I finally got better with them and more consistent with them and stood strong to them? She said to me, she said, I wish that you had stood up to me sooner, a lot sooner.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that
Yeah.
fascinating? Yeah. And that's such a dynamic where we feel like, oh, the kids can't handle me speaking my voice or me leaving this marriage or me standing up for myself to their other parent. And then later realizing how much they knew or absorbed or wanted. Yeah, that's a hard conversation, but a really good conversation that I'm sure opened up to a great growth opportunity for you and your daughter to talk
Oh,
about
for sure. I
being
mean,
heard.
yes. And the other important aspect of that is actually learning how to be comfortable with people's reactions to your boundaries. That's the hard part, because the people that aren't used to you having boundaries or setting boundaries or standing strong to your boundaries, their reactions are going to be big.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not easy, especially if you're sort of trying to be a recovered pleaser.
Right.
It hurts you to see people upset with you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. But they're used to you being a people pleaser, so it's less convenient for them and they might balk at it, at first. Yeah.
Yeah. And part of it was me explaining to them, look, I am not doing this to you.
Right.
I'm not saying no to, like, at you or to you or to hurt you. I said, I am doing this. Well, it depended on the situation, but it was either I'm doing this because I need this boundary. Like, let's say if it's something to do with their safety or something, right? Especially with teens. Or another one would be, I am doing this for you. Like, this
Yeah.
boundary is kind of for you, right?
Yes.
I'm doing this because I love you, and you
Yes.
need to have some limits in life. And
Mm-hmm.
you can't just do everything you please. Like, there's some boundaries, right?
Yeah.
And or like one of the beginnings of it was me saying no about driving. I was driving my kids everywhere because I lived in the country, and it was just becoming too much. And finally I said, look, I said, first of all, you guys need to talk to each other and figure out when you're going to town and try to do it at the same time and try to come home at the same time or somewhere around that, because I'm not going there and back all in the same day.
Yeah.
And there's going to be days where I'm not even driving. I'm taking the day off.
Yeah.
So and guess what? That's not even necessarily a no. If
Right.
you can find a drive to where you want to go, be my guests. And what was great about that was I empowered them to problem solve. Right.
Yes.
And so I really loved that. I really
Yeah.
loved seeing that.
Yeah.
So,
Often as people pleasers, we enable the other person to be dependent on us. So yeah, you were able to empower your daughters by setting your boundaries, which helped both of you. Of course, you didn't have to
yeah.
drive so much, and they found new ways to manage it. Yeah, I love that with ADHD, we have obviously the challenges that come with it, with focus and emotional dysregulation and all the things. But then there's also this part of us that's creative and good at problem solving, and is like willing to kind of be flexible and roll with it and see an opportunity as a growth moment and a learning opportunity, and then play with that, and play, like you said, play with your triggers, play with your pain, play with the pleasure, and see what comes of it. And that's part of the novelty that lights us up and gives us the dopamine that we so desire. Is just like getting some newness into our life, even if it's difficult. It's movement forward. It's doing something different. It's always good. Yeah. Okay. I mean, we could go so many places with this conversation,
So
but
true.
our poor listeners who I assume have ADHD themselves are like, okay, now this is as much as I can absorb, Pasha and Natalie. So yes. So Natalie, if people want to reach out to you about ADHD and divorce or follow you, what's the best way they can do so?
Well, one of my main platform has been Instagram. So on Instagram, I'm at ADH Divorce.
Okay.
And then I've recently just starting to dip my toes into Clubhouse, which I'm really loving it actually. So on there I am ADH Divorce as well. I'm also on there as that. And then I just started my own Facebook group, a support group for women, an inclusive support group for women with ADHD or without ADHD for who are experiencing going through separation or divorce. And it's called Recreating You. So I just started that. That's on Facebook. And then I have a TikTok, but I only have a few little videos on there, so I wouldn't bother. And my website, I won't even bother with my website because I need to actually redo it. I haven't I
This is so
haven't
ADHD.
I haven't exactly, right? I haven't done it's still my old
Yeah. So it's like
niche.
80% done, but we need to finish it and relaunch it. Yeah.
No, it's all about like parenting and the mom, like children, all
Yeah.
that. There's zero on there about divorce, like nothing.
Okay, and you're in a whole new realm. So yeah,
Yeah,
I find you easily on Instagram. It's very easy to find you. And so yes, please reach out to Natalie. And you could join both of our Facebook groups and get a lot out of it because we both work with women in particular with ADHD. And so in Natalie's group, if you're moving through a separation or divorce or thinking about that, and then if you want to delve into the things that make her face red, like sex and intimacy and
still red.
sexuality
I'm
and
still red. It's
self
probably a
pleasure,
hot flash.
then you come on over to my group, Getting Intimate with ADHD. But I'm on Facebook and Instagram as Pasha Marlowe. And then my website is pashamarlowe.com. It's super easy. And I actually offer a free coaching session to any of my listeners. So I'll be putting that link in the show notes so that you can easily reach out to me and we could chat and we could share ADHD stories and beyond, or pleasure stories, and help you meet your dreams and goals. So yeah, I hope you all reach out to Natalie and I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. If you did, it would be amazing if you would share it and
Please.
subscribe or review, do all the things, but mostly share it. We want to give this information to people who need it. So yes, thank you all for joining us today, and we will see you soon. Bye. Thanks, Natalie.
Thank you.